So let's talk about Donald Trump announcing that he plans to do an executive order to basically eradicate mail-in voting. Now, for a moment, before we talk about the legality of this executive order, because we're not talking about federal elections, this will be for the upcoming midterms, so these are states' elections. Outside of whether he has the right to do this, because obviously in a national presidential election, the federal government would have the power, I think, to do this. But for states, it gets a little hairy. But if we're talking about wanting to get elections to be safe and secure, the very first thing you do is ban mail-in voting. It is rife and it is ripe with opportunity to produce fraud. In fact, the only reason to allow mail-in voting, outside of rare exceptions, right? Military, people out of the country who have previously applied for this. So you should be able to count them, in the hundreds at most. Outside of those very specific conditions, it should never, ever, ever be allowed, because you are opening the door wide open and saying, come on, for anyone who wants to cheat. That's what happens when you do mail-in voting. I'm just saying it like it is. Now, whether or not Trump is going to be able to do it, that's another story, because again, states' rights, I'd give him like a 5 to 10% chance of this succeeding. I think if I had to guess, this is more so to force the issue into the public sphere, to get Republican states to make their moves to end this bad practice once and for all. I mean, across the board, all elections should require identification. There should be no states like California or New York which allow you just to say, yep, it's me. I'm the guy. I'm the citizen. Don't look at me. You don't have to check my citizenship. Nothing like New York. None of that should ever be allowed, right? But at bare minimum, Trump is on the right track with making this an issue. Now, as to whether states will follow through, who knows? But this is the right move, because for the sake of our representative republic, our democratic way of life, this practice of mail-in voting must be purged. It must be expunged. And anyone defending it outright are pro-cheating. We all know what the end result is going to be. There are going to be a certain segment of society that will cheat. Now, how many there are, who knows? Could it be big enough to sway elections? Who knows? But why leave that open, especially now when you already have a problem with electronic ballot systems, which are already able to be hacked? All of that should be banned. We should go back to paper ballots like we used to do. You should be able to count the entire election results in one night. None of this BS days, weeks, garbage. This did not used to be the trend, mind you. It was very, very rare when you had a presidential election that wasn't decided within a few hours after the polling places closed. The first time in my lifetime that I actually remember it going into multiple days would have been the Bush v. Gore, the hanging Chad drama. This, by the way, was the left's J6 incident. They refused to accept President George W. Bush. Not my president. That's where that came from. That was an anti-Bush reaction to the hanging Chads. But the fix to that was then to put electronic voting systems that are hackable. It is crucial. It is critical for the survival of our republic for people to be able to trust the voting system. And the only way that you can go back to a system that people might trust is have a system that can be monitored by the public at large. I'd put CCTVs in every polling place and then broadcast it to the internet so everyone can watch. Shouldn't just have observers. Everyone should be able to see what's going on inside those voting places. That's just my opinion, but off the top of my head. But that's what I would do. Get rid of mail-in ballots. Get rid of electronic voting. But no, they're going to fight Trump tooth and nail. So this is The Independent. Story by Alex Woodward. Trump says he will sign executive order and lead the movement against mail-in voting. Donald Trump says he plans to lead a movement to get rid of mail-in voting and the use of voting machines to process ballots before 2026 midterm elections. Yeah, so he's going after both then. And right, so I think this confirms, and we'll read on to see, but I think, to me, this confirms that, yeah, the point of this is to get the conversation going I think he knows that the executive order probably will not stand. I hope it does. I'll be honest, I do. Because let the states run the elections the way they want to, but there are certain things that should be in place to ensure integrity. And that is identification, to prove who you are, is who you say you are, and get rid of mail-in voting and electronic machines. All of that crap needs to go. Now, the president, whose false and inflated claims about early voting span more than a decade, even though we really don't know for sure, but it's false and inflated, once again amplified bogus claims about vote-by-mail ballots and voting machines on his Truth Social's account with a lengthy post baselessly accusing Democratic officials of cheating and being virtually unelectable without using mail-in ballots. He said Monday that he intended to sign an executive order to help bring honesty to upcoming elections. The president then falsely said that states which administer elections are merely an agent for the federal government in counting and tabulating the votes. He said they must do what the federal government, as represented by the President of the United States, tells them for the good of our country to do. I and the Republican Party will fight like hell to bring honesty and integrity back to our elections. The mail-in ballot hoax using voting machines that are a complete and total disaster must end now. And by the way, again, he's not wrong. Those systems have done incredible damage to the trustworthiness of our elections. In 25 years, we went from trusting our electorate system to completely losing faith in it. I don't know anyone personally who thinks that the voting system isn't rigged one way or the other, either for Republicans or against them or for Democrats, depending on which side of the aisle they're on. And that has to end, because you will not have a country that lasts. Because as long as people think that they can, if they lose an election, they can go back again next time and try again. This is how you don't end up with violent people overthrowing your government. This is why you don't get coups in the United States, because people believe that if they just fight hard enough, convince people enough, that they can change people's minds. I mean, look at Roe v. Wade. Decades and decades and decades to push to try and end the practice that the Christian right felt was evil and wrong, and they finally got their way. They convinced enough people. You got enough Supreme Court justices to go back in there and pull a shoddy ruling out, and now it goes back to the states where it should have stayed. But the point is that if the American people think that they can, even if it takes decades, change people's mind and change the way the country is run, then you have a peaceful disagreements on the issues, which is what we used to do. Now, in remarks from the Oval Office, The Independent writes on Monday, he said an executive order was being written right now by the best lawyers in the country. He suggested that eliminating mail-in ballots would prevent his political rivals from getting elected. He said, if you end mail-in voting, you're not going to have many Democrats get elected, he said. That's bigger than anything to do with redistricting. And the Republicans have to get smart. Nearly a third of all ballots cast in the 2024 elections were submitted by mail. That is horrifying. Oh my God, that is way too many. Unbelievable. 33%. Let's see. Let's go back. In the year 2000, it was at 12%, which I think is still way too high, by the way. But over a third. That's insane. Now, if Trump tries to implement a total ban on mail-in and absentee ballots, voters in the military, as well as disabled voters and voters who cannot show up in person on election day, wouldn't be able to cast a vote. Now, that's just disingenuous, because obviously there would be exceptions to the rule that would allow those people to vote by mail. This is just absurd. They know this, but they just want to make Trump look like an idiot, so that's the plan. Now, earlier this year, a federal judge blocked Trump's executive order that sought to prevent states from counting mail-in ballots that were postmarked by Election Day but arrived later. Which, by the way, yeah, you shouldn't be counting votes after the Election Day. That's retarded. Again, this opens the door for fraud. Now, mail-in voting remains a vital safeguard of our democracy. It ensures that voters with disabilities, those without transportation access, and others who rely on its flexibility and access can exercise their right to vote, said the ACLU's Voting Rights Project Director, Sophia Lakin. What a bunch of crap. A vital safeguard for our democracy. Shut the up. If anything, it has been tearing down our democracy by destroying and eroding trust. President Trump's attempts to undermine a safe, proven? and reliable method of voting that he himself uses, along with his attack on voting technology, are just another part of his strategy to sow distrust in our elections and prevent voters from holding him accountable. Trump's narrative also has supported his attempts to reverse election results in states he lost, inspired Republican-led legislation in nearly every state to change how elections are run, and was central to his 2024 campaign. The president elevated those false claims, while his own campaign was pleading with Republican voters last year to request mail-in ballots and use the exact same election tools that Trump and his allies have tried to criminalize. Well, yeah, you got to fight fire with fire if you believe it's corrupted. Your only bet at that point is simply to go all in. Trump's campaign and the Republican National Committee launched a Swamp the Vote, which used to contact information from people who signed up to get campaign updates to generate new absentee or mail ballot registrations and early in-person voting commitments. You need to make a plan, register, and vote any way possible. Well, yeah. I mean, if you can't just say, well, because I don't like this, but they're going to use it anyway, that we're not going to use it, that's retarded. The president's election lies. Man, this person really is trying to convince his audience that the guy is lying at every turn. We're also central to criminal cases against him in Georgia and in Washington, D.C., where his claims helped fuel violence at the Capitol on January 6th. Trump's Truth Social post comes just days after he claimed that Russian President Vladimir Putin told him that the 2020 election was rigged because of mail-in voting. Vladimir Putin said something, one of the most interesting things. Trump told Fox News, he said, your election was rigged because you have mail-in voting, Trump claimed. He said, mail-in voting, every election, no country has mail-in voting. It's impossible to have mail-in voting and have honest elections. And he said to me, because we talked about 2020, he said, you won that election by so much. I mean, come on, that's just Trump speak. At least 34 other countries also allow postal voting, including at least a dozen, such as Canada, Germany, New Zealand, South Korea, and Sweden, that allow voting by mail for all voters, which again is a retarded thing to do. Now, Russia has allowed mail-in voting in some circumstances as recently as 2020. Well, who cares? Russians' elections are highly suspect. I'll just put it that way. Now, asked on Sunday why Trump and Putin had discussed mail-in voting during their summit in Alaska, because they are having conversations, Russia expert Fiona Hill told CBS News that Putin wants the country to tie ourselves up in knots between now and the midterms. Russia always wants that. This isn't news. Putin wants to sow chaos in the American electoral system, she said. The Russian president used his time with President Trump to push that along, she said. It's a pure blatant piece of manipulation, and that's the kind of thing that Putin likes to do. Spoiler alert, Fiona. None of that matters. Trump's been saying this for years. Just because Putin might say it doesn't mean that that's going to change Trump's mind or anybody else's. But whatever. The Independent is the world's most free-thinking news brand. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's just self-promotion. Anyway, so bottom line is, I don't think that Trump is going to be able to do this. I don't think his executive order is going to fly long term, but I think it will help drive the narrative, which is going to be, I think, this is just my opinion here, but I think is the real purpose, is to get the American people talking about it, get that buzz going, put the pressure on for these Republican states to get their asses in gear and do something about it to protect the electoral integrity. That's what I think this is all about. We'll see if it works. But Trump just keeps on rolling over his opponents since his second term started. So I don't know. My money is on this actually getting real traction. And wouldn't that be something, my friends?